Live, Joe. Here we are from. Yeah, we did it with our technological expertise. Sometimes it's crazy. You know how many interviews I do, and there are always problems of any kind: the audio, the video, and sometimes you just reboot, problem solved. Why is that?
Well, I'm amazed at how many of these great interviews you do, and that you can stay on top of all the technologies. There's so many systems, so many things that can go wrong. I'm amazed at it often works.
Yeah, honestly, if I go back a few years, it was basically impossible to do something like what we're doing now. And now I complain about the fact, that maybe I would love an 4K quality instead of, that's crazy. But anyway, Joe, I'm really, really happy to have this chat with you. I told you before, I watched this video, fantastic video I suggested to everyone, where you were analyzing how politicians use, all the context and how to analyze the politicians' body language. It was really, really interesting and inspiring. What's the situation now with Biden and Donald? Are they done or not?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Right now, in spite of all the lawsuits, which seem to be going nowhere, I think by the 12th of December, all the certification will be in, and so it's a done deal. But we've never experienced anything like this. But they're not finding any irregularities, and
right.
Things just move forward. Politicians are being politicians, that's all.
But, Joe, since you are a fantastic body language expert, you know who's lying. Just, having a look at Trump and Biden, you know who's lying. So I imagine that you have your own opinion. What I found very fascinating about your analysis about politicians and body language was that basically you said that they are actors. I mean, they perform. It's like a theater, and they perform very well, and they are very well aware about all the meaning of their movements and way of moving on the stage. And really, it's like that now everywhere in the world.
You're exactly right. I mean, everything is really staged ahead of time. Little things that people don't notice. For instance, how often the background is blue in color, how they tend to wear a navy blue suit, a white shirt, and a burgundy tie, which just happens to be very similar to the American flag. The fact that they never show them closer than between 9 and 10 feet, about 3 meters, because we don't want to see the differences in height.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because we have, I'll give you an example. In the United States, only 2% of the population, or about 3% of the population, is above 6 feet 2 inches, but CEOs of Fortune 500 company, about 39% of them are above 6'2". So it's not that they're smarter, is that we as a species have a preference for, like we say, tall, dark, and handsome. We have a preference, a preference for height, and so they keep them separated so that the eye cannot, bring them together and compare them. Those are the little things that, when we look at not just body language, but the overarching nonverbal communications, we focus on.
It's really interesting. And I also, Joe, feel a bit embarrassed talking with you because anything I do, I feel under observation. So I don't know. I try to stay still as I can, but I cannot, we Italian people, we move. And so we're very easy to spot and to understand, actually. So, but
I come from a Cuban background, so I'm used to talking with the hands. I'm used to being somewhat dramatic. Interestingly enough, it's when it disappears that we have to wonder why.
Right. That's interesting. It's funny. The other day, I was asked a question, all right? And it was a question so untruth, all right? Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like, why do you ask me that? Okay. And the more I tried to bring my truth out there, the more I felt like I was guilty, people thought probably is guilty because it doesn't have a proper answer, So I thought, wow, it's so weird, when you are absolutely right and you have nothing to hide, sometimes you behave in a way that maybe is considered the opposite. So I always wonder, someone who did your job and is doing your job, how do you put everything into a context? Because maybe there are some signals, but you always have to maybe consider all the context. I don't know. My English was horrible, but I hope you understood my question.
No. That's a great question and perfectly spoken. I was just thinking of the times when I go, do a program and I'm talking, and somebody in the audience says, well, what about Area 51? Where are all the aliens hidden?
Right.
And my body contorts, my face gets contorts, like I can't even believe you're asking this stupid question. And, if somebody were just looking at that, they would say, oh, look at him. His face is distorting. So therefore, he must be lying and so forth. So let me just say this. There are no aliens. Let's get over that. Secondly, the purpose of nonverbals is to communicate silently what we're feeling. Now, if you go back 700,000 years, we were still in Africa. Our species had to communicate silently because we were surrounded by predators. And so many of our behaviors, right, are very silent. We look at each other and we go, whoa, very silent communication. It had to be that way for survival. The preoccupation with worrying about whether somebody is lying or not is very difficult because we know from all the studies that have been done since 1986, Paul Ekman, Bella DeParlo, Mark Frank, David Matsumoto, Albert Vree in London. What do we know? We're only as good as 50-50 at detecting deception. So, we for me in the FBI, it wasn't about detecting deception. It was about, if I ask you a question and I see displays of psychological discomfort, what is behind that? Right. And so I may ask more questions. I mean, you yourself, as you're telling this story about being asked a question that was odd, you didn't notice your blink rate went up. You didn't notice that your glabella furrowed. Right? That doesn't mean you're lying. It just means that this event was troubling and you are displaying that emotion. It is my job as an investigator to then elicit information and say how troublesome was it, how bothersome, and so forth. And so is there consistency between the story and the emotion? But the concept of that somebody touched their nose or touched their mouth and therefore they're lying. That's just utter nonsense. And
Right.
really, anybody that goes on these shows and says, "Oh, well, we can detect deception," I'm happy to take them on in court, because the fact of the matter is we're really lousy at it. Now, true, we humans do display psychological discomfort in real time, and when something bothers us, we will react to it. But that doesn't mean that they're being deceptive.
Got it. For instance, there are all of these ideas that I don't know. I've always been doing a lot of events and a lot of talking, and often I'm cold, and I'm always crossing my arms because I'm cold. Like now, I'm crossing my arms, and so people say, "Oh, you very defensive. Why you are?" And I just think, well, man, I'm just cold. So it has nothing to do with my mood. So,
but let me say this, because as you're saying that, your eyelids are coming down. You're doing the eyelid flutter, so I know how
I feel so observed. All right.
Well, but that's the benefit of it. As you're telling the story, your body language is potentiating exactly what you're saying. The fact of the matter is that we cross our arms because it's a self-hug. It's self-soothing. It helps us. Even when we're angry, it's a self-hug. Every time I hear some so-called experts say, "Oh, it's a blocking behavior, you're distancing yourself," it's like, there's so much crap out there. It's like, where do you people pull this from? I go to the movies, I sit like this. It's very comforting. I listen to a professor and I cross my arms because it's comforting. I bet half of what I do almost every day is to get rid of the myths that are out there. Like, if you look up and to the left and then to the right, then the person is being deceptive. This is just sheer nonsense.
And how do you take a decision at the end? I mean, if there is someone like a dangerous personality, maybe it's a dangerous personality or not. Like in your book, by the way, translated in Italian, there is a link in the comments. Yeah. But they get this person, and then they start this interrogation, right. and they trying to understand if he's guilty or not. You have to arrive to a moment where, okay, you have to decide, is guilty or not. Maybe say, no, I'm not guilty, but maybe all of the signals that you see say something different. How does it work? I mean, take us behind the scene of this process.
Well, that's a great question, because there's one that takes you through the whole thing, and thank you for mentioning the book Dangerous Personalities, which is now finally, thanks to Roy Edizioni in Italian. I've wanted this book for so long. I have a lot of followers in Italy. Maybe it's because of my last name, Navarro. A lot of people think I'm Italian, and I probably am. But as I mentioned in the book, when you're in the presence of someone else, only they know the truth. Okay, only they know the truth. I mean, unless there was a camera there filming it. And even then, oftentimes our perceptions are affected. So my job in the FBI was to collect the facts. Okay, it wasn't to determine are they being truthful or not. So one of the stories that I tell in Dangerous Personalities is sitting across from a psychopath. Okay, so here's an individual who has no conscience. Here's an individual who has no regard for humanity. He has no regard for life, only cares about himself. And the first thing is to try and get this person to open up. to talk to us. So you're talking about the procedure. And so something so simple as the kinds of questions you ask, which are open. I'm not being aggressive. I use head tilt. Head tilt gets people to open up. They perceive you as more receptive. Or I'll sit at an angle, so my eyes are not right on them. Right. People open up when you're at angles. People close up when you're like this, right? Nobody wants to be interrogated like that.
So I have to interview people now. My guest a little bit of an angle. I'll try this. All right.
Well, believe it or not, it's an interesting concept that perhaps just a slight turn may benefit you, but most people want to be receptive to you.
Interesting.
So then the next thing is to get them to at least communicate, to open up. So I always start with very broad questions, or just things. Where did you grow up? Things like this to get them to just talk to us. But there comes a moment, and one of the stories in the book is about a woman who is in fact a psychopath, and she is so good at lying. I mean, she has lied all her life. And it quickly dawned on me. So here's a person that loves to break the law, has done many illegal things, and so forth. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, anything that she says, I have to go out and prove. So it's about collecting the facts and then trying to verify it. So, she would tell me, yes, I did this on this date and that date, and I would go out and verify it. And sure enough, she's lying. Her credit card showed that she was not in this city. Her credit card showed that she was spending money somewhere else, things like that. And so, in the United States, you have to satisfy, for instance, the elements of the law, the corpus delicti. So I'll give you an example for burglary, right? So burglary, entering a structure with the intent to commit a theft, okay? So you have to prove that the person entered. Well, how do we do that? Fingerprints, hair, something like that. Intent to steal. They went through all the drawers and so forth. So we have to, it's not just whether I think she's lying. I have to collect the facts and then portray them to the jury, who then decides my story fits the facts, that she entered a structure to commit a theft versus hers. So she can say whatever she wants. I mean, let's face it. How many people have confessed to the Kennedy assassination? The last time I looked, there were like 112 people who over the years have confessed to the Kennedy assassination. You still have to go and prove it, because in the United States, even with a confession, that's not enough. You have to prove the confession. Got it.
Well, I recently, Joe, I've watched the Jeffrey Epstein documentary.
Oh yeah, great show. Yeah,
and several things. I mean, I was thinking about a lot of things that I saw in the documentary, but one part that really got my attention was the interrogation. There are some bits of Jeffrey Epstein interrogation, and I was wondering. I don't know. All the facts were clearly against him. But if you just watch the interrogation, apart that most of the time he just say no comments, no, I can't answer, no, blah blah blah. So he doesn't give any answer. But to me, I can't say if he's lying or not. I can't. To me, it looks okay, because he's a normal person. So I where do you start in that kind of situation?
Well, that I'm glad you asked that, because first of all, what you saw on television was not an interrogation. What you saw on television was what we call a deposition. And a deposition, law enforcement is not there. The people that are there are two attorneys, one representing one of the parties, one of the victims. The other one is representing Mr. Epstein. And so during a deposition, he can say, well, my counsel tells me I don't have to answer that, or I have no recollection, or which is very different than a true police interview, which, you know, if I had been on the case, you know, it would have been one of these things where there's nobody there and it's just him and me. And then it's a matter of, let's talk about the facts. Now, most likely, because I've dealt with guys like him all my life, the first thing they say is, I want my attorney. I don't want to talk to you. And of course, we have to respect that. You know, the what we saw on television was someone, a predator, who was taking advantage of the legal system to get around it. And by the time you see that video, you have to remember, how many meetings has he had with an attorney who has coached him what to say, what to do? But here's the thing. Anytime I look at a situation where there is a lot of damage, a lot of human damage, right? So the raping of a young woman, the abuse, the sexual abuse of a young woman. And I see someone who can answer with a very calloused, very flat, what we call a flat affect. There's not a lot of emotion. There's not a lot of, oh, geez, there's not a lot of consciousness. The first thing that begins to tell me is, okay, and this is what the book is about. Am I dealing with someone who has the traits of either the malignant narcissist or the psychopath? And if that's the case, I'm not going to see the same kinds of behaviors. I'm not going to see, you know, the crushing weight of being accused of something horrific. I'm going to see somebody who's, I don't know what you're talking about, this sort of cockiness, this sort of arrogance. And so that tells me, do not expect the truth from this person, no matter what I ask. So what do we rely on? Witness testimony, evidence, receipts, hairs. I have to tell you, unfortunately, in the United States, we have 17,500 different police departments.
Right.
Unlike any other country in the world, we don't have one Scotland Yard. We have 17,500 different ones. And the standards are different in each one. You know, if that had been in my jurisdiction, I would have seized the house. I would have taken out all the plumbing. I would have looked for hairs, fibers, blood, evidence. I would have gone through all the garbage. I would have gone through everything that could be touched in that house, and it would have been mine. I would have been studying that in the lab for weeks to say, yes, these young girls were in this house. Yes, these young girls were, taken to these rooms specifically as they described.
So facts.
Forensics, facts. That's what I would have done. Because when you're dealing with malignant narcissism and the antisocial personality, the psychopath, there is no appreciation for the truth on their part. Absolutely none. And so you have to prove everything. And it's not impossible, but you have to look at it differently than you would a normal case.
I see. Demis on YouTube has an interesting question. I also had the same curiosity while you were talking. I was thinking about it. But he asked, if a person like a professional actor learn a perfect body language could be a good liar, because I was thinking about politicians.
Sure.
Some of them, I think about a lot of Italian politicians, for instance, but they are all over the world. They are fantastic actors, and they can lie on camera, and a normal person probably think, wow, they telling the truth, they're not lying. How does it work?
Well, and that's the problem, is we have sort of been sold this idea that we should that detecting deception should only be done by the body language. And I'm telling you, as an investigator, that when I was in the FBI, I assumed everybody was lying to me. Even honest people lied to me because they didn't want to get involved, or they didn't want to be hassled or whatever. And so when I listen to politicians, we had one here you may be aware of, who said, well, Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Okay. In the end, either Mexico paid for the wall or Mexico didn't pay for the wall. It's very binary. Yeah. And when a politician says, I'm not going to raise taxes, and then raises taxes, there shouldn't be a lot of shock in that. What we have to do is look at the evidence, look at the comportment, see if the facts follow. But to assume that we somehow should use body language to say, aha. Now, I'll tell you one way that body language is useful with politicians is not when they're speaking, but when they're asked a question. And the question,
interesting.
The question that they're asked, they're not prepared for. And what's interesting is how they distort their faces. They'll do the they do all sorts of things, but here's the thing, is we can't say that they're lying. All we can say is that question created psychological discomfort. And then the question is, why? Why did that question create psychological discomfort? Is it because you now have to lie to answer it, or it shows that you are now exposed to the public? But that's really all that we can infer from that.
I see. So basically what you're telling me is that body language is one part of the work of an investigator. So you have some facts, you have some signals, and then you have to take a decision based on the whole evaluation.
You're exactly right. And it can work the other way. For instance, I worked a rape case not too far from here. I was helping out a local police department where a woman alleged in the space of 5 years that she had been raped 3 times. Now, statistically, this is highly improbable. Okay, I'm not saying that women aren't abused. Right. I'm just that this happened 3 times. And one of the things that stood out is that when we would talk to her, she could cry on demand, but we didn't see the other behaviors that we normally would see. One of them was she never touched her neck. So normally, when people are describing something horrific, there's a lot of neck touching. Right? There's a lot of this, right? There was none of that. And so, I said to the investigators, there's something not right here. First of all, it's statistically very odd. But secondly, we're not seeing the behaviors that are consistent with this deep agony. Now, most people don't know about this. Maybe good actors do. To make a long story short, after we asked her to reenact how the last event took place, it all fell apart. She had been making this up because she actually has what we call a borderline personality, and she was using this to get attention. None of these events took place. So here's one where the absence of the behavior gave us a clue that something wasn't right. And that's really all we can use it for. Is it's a tool, but if you're doing due diligence, you really have to talk to the individual.
I was curious about your FBI preparation. I wonder if there is an FBI school for studying all of these topics. What kind of learning is there? And also, I was curious, Joe, how much has changed, has evolved the technique along the years, and the knowledge about body language and so on.
I love that question. That's a great one. Well, we had the basic academy, which you see in the show Quantico, but then we had the advanced interview classes, and these are ones that initially I took, and then in the end I was teaching, for instance, the advanced counterterrorism interview courses. And what really evolved was the big change came between the 70s and the 80s, where now we had more research. I remember entering into the FBI and people were still teaching that, if somebody doesn't make eye contact, that they're lying. If they look down or they look away and stuff like that. And by the way, let me just say this. Gaze behavior is not indicative of deception. In fact, there are many cultures where, for instance, in Latin America, when you are being chastised, you're supposed to look down. In Africa, with African Americans, the same thing. When you're in the face of authority, you look down. And there were so many people that were teaching eye aversion equals deception. There are other words I can use, but crap satisfies this. This is utter nonsense. And what happened between the late 70s and the late 80s was the great work that now was coming in with Paul Ekman, Mark Frank, Bella DePaulo, Judy Burgoon. All these great people were now doing research and saying, hey guys, time out. What you're teaching is junk. And now we have science. So we have seen it progress to where the new standard is we don't even use nonverbals to detect deception. I mean, there are people still teaching this out there, but I have to disagree with it, because the new model is we teach nonverbals in a forensic setting to look for issues, because humans are good at revealing when something bothers us. You yourself, your face is so easy to read. The minute you feel something, you display it in your face. and that's all we can infer from it. It's up to us to then get to the facts. Let me share something with you that I talk about in the book, and that is the problem of when we accuse people of detecting deception, or that they're being deceptive through nonverbals. So we looked at the 261 DNA exonerations, people who were on death row because they were accused of a heinous crime. Not one police officer of those 261 cases could detect that they were actually telling the truth, but they all said, no, we're sure they're lying.
Right.
That's 100% of the time they were wrong. And that's the problem with it. That we
why is that?
Because we have been taught erroneously that that if the face distorts and does this and does that, or they touch their mouth, we associate it with deception. All we can associate it with is psychological discomfort. And in many cases, it was caused by the police officer. Listen, I know what it's like to be interviewed by a policeman or an FBI agent, and they're standing around you. They've got a gun. It's scary. You're going to see behaviors that look very different. But to associate those behaviors with deception it's both morally and ethically wrong. all we can say is, yeah, I asked him, where were you last night? And he did one of these. Well, it's a simple question.
Yeah.
All we can say is that question caused him stress. We cannot go any further from that. So the new standard, you asked a good question. Where is it now? The new standard is all we can say is that there was psychological discomfort. We cannot go any further from that.
And is the FBI the most advanced, let's say, place or unit in the world, or there are other countries like, I don't know, China or Russia that have developed some new techniques, or what do you think?
It depends on what you're looking at, because a lot of countries, their security state or security organs both handle criminal matters, counterintelligence matter, national security matters, and restive populations. I would argue that one of the advantages the FBI had is that we had fairly much an unlimited budget. And I mean, it was fairly much unlimited. We could hire any expert in the world, anytime. And that's who came and taught me one-on-one. So, I got to hire Paul Ekman to come in. I got to hire all these experts to come in and teach us one-on-one. Not every law enforcement agency in the world can do that. I can tell you that around the world, often what we see is, well, I'll be honest with you. I have been to countries in Western Europe that are probably between 15 and 20 years behind in interviewing techniques. And I don't fault them per se. I fault the system that perhaps they're under, because the politicians aren't providing the training. They're not keeping up with the latest techniques. At the same time, I was in a country, and I won't name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but I was astonished that when I talked to the investigators, they basically said to me, well, we can only write down what they say. We can't write down their behaviors. And I was like ready to bite my finger. You've got to be kidding me, right? You're telling me that for 2.7 million years, our hominin species evolved to communicate non-verbally primarily. And you guys here on a whim decided that you're going to ignore that? And you're only going to focus on words? It's like, hello, McFly, what are you doing? It's like you've taken the primacy of communication and you've relegated what? When the baby's born, you're waiting for it to talk?
Yeah. Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but that's what some countries have done. And of course, the other extreme is there's some countries that are just simply brutish, that everything is about beating them up and abusing them or drugging them. And of course, junk in, junk out. And let me say this, at one time in the United States, we could say we've never done this, during the Bush years, some of this was allowed. And I can tell you unequivocally that torture does not work. The only thing torture guarantees is pain. It doesn't guarantee the truth. And fortunately, we in the FBI never subscribed to it. Most of the intelligence services have never subscribed to it. And what's interesting is the people that subscribed to it were the ones that were the last to show up to the game of investigating terrorism. And that just shows lack of ingenuity and lack of experience.
Joe, connected to this, I see a question in chat that is about artificial intelligence. And in general, I saw other questions about the lie detectors, the machine. In the movies, you always see, now we connect you to the machine and he's able to lie to the machine. I don't know, all this thing. What's the, let's say, the state of the art of the technology, and does it help? It doesn't? What's the situation?
Well, I mean, look, the American Academy of Science basically said that there's no science to support the use of the polygraph, which explains why most people don't realize this. In America, you can't use the polygraph exam in court. And the reason you cannot use it in court, you can use it in movies because it looks good. You can't use it in court is because there's not much science there.
I see.
And the reason that it's called a polygraph is that because that's all it does. It measures your reaction to a word, but it doesn't tell you the why. Now, a lot of people are susceptible to that, right? So, you know, they, you know, you go into the interview and they say, well, the machine says you're lying. And some people will say, okay, you got me. Now, here's the danger of those 261 studies that I personally looked at. Fully 25% of the population, that's 1/4 of the population, were willing to go along with the investigators and agree that they were guilty just to stop the interview process. In other words, they just got tired of it. They didn't want to be hassled anymore, and so forth. And so eventually they will yield. Have I seen the polygraph fail or succeed? Rarely. Have I seen it fail? Almost with every spy that was spying in the American government, from Aldrich Ames to everybody else, they were passing the polygraph, and the polygraph basically failed. And you know, I hear this all the time. Well, the polygraph is a tool. Stop right there. You know, in the 6th grade, we learned that all analogies are not analogous. It is not a tool. Okay, that it is not a tool. It is a magic box that you can point to and it says you're lying. And some people will succumb to that. But you know, would I use it? No, because I've seen it. I've seen it fail so many times. So many times.
Yeah. I never met Joe a spy. At least maybe I have met, but I don't know. I'm not aware of having ever met a spy. So it feels like a movie, you know, like Jason Bourne or Mission Impossible. How does a spy behave? I mean, is it like just a job? You know, like I'm an entrepreneur and a spy is a spy and that's it?
Well, that's a good question. So let's differentiate. So in the business of counterintelligence, what the public calls a spy is an intelligence officer. So every country, you know, sends out their people to collect intelligence, and the public calls them spies. And then we have people like me who work counterintelligence, and so we try to identify the spies and then try to somehow neutralize their activities. You know, most of the spies, as we call it, intelligence officers that I met, were from the former Soviet Union, then from the Russian Federation, East German intelligence, Bulgarian, Hungarian intelligence. I liked them all. They were great. they were, well, because first of all, they're very educated. They're the best their country has to offer. So, you know, it's not like working a bank robbery. You know, it's like, you know, the average bank robber gets away with $2,200. I mean, these guys are getting away with a lot. So they're really smart. They're really interesting. They're fascinating. They're well-read. And I always enjoyed their company. Even as I was putting handcuffs on them, I always enjoyed being around them. But, you know, there were some that were a little bit more thuggish, you know, like the Soviet GRU, which is their former military intelligence. I mean, these guys were just, you know, they just didn't dress right. They were sort of, you know,
out of the baseline.
They were not James Bond. They
No.
they hadn't seen a tuxedo ever.
Right.
The guys in the KGB, spoke perfect English, very erudite. East German intelligence was absolutely fabulous.
Have you ever met an Italian spy? I wonder if we have Italian spies around, just going around. Maybe not.
Well, one of the cases that I had, which I talk about in another book called 3 Minutes to Doomsday, was a guy, Tommaso Mortati, I think that was his name. And he was an American who was stationed in Italy. But then that fits the real term that we use for spy. So here was an American who was a serviceman, but he was selling secrets to a foreign power. So those are the ones that we call spies. No, I've worked with some of the intelligence services from Italy, very professional. Very good people, really know their stuff, and I always enjoyed my my cases that I worked with them.
But would you say, Joe, that in this moment there are still a lot of spies going around the world, or is something more of the Cold War and is a new war now?
Well, there's more espionage going on now than at any time in history, and the reason for it is multifold. It used to be that no Russians were allowed even to come into the United States. East Germans weren't allowed to come into the United States, and so forth. And so the focus was very narrow. Now we have people from throughout the world who can travel here very easily. And so for them, conducting espionage, which often is making friendships and then getting them to do them favors and things like this, is much easier. The technology is much easier. I mean, I can initiate an intelligence operation by merely taking a thumb drive, right? Giving a thumb drive to someone and say, oh, here's my pictures from my vacation. Take that home and take a look at it, rather than showing it to you. The minute they plug that thing into that computer, I own that computer. That computer is mine forever. And so the ability to hack into systems that, in the old days, spies used to, take pictures with big cameras and stuff. Now you can download a terabyte of information onto a small disk in probably 8 or 10 minutes, and that's what's really frightening.
Joe, we have 5 minutes, but I was curious to go back to the topic of your latest book translated in Italian, because in this moment of COVID, one important fact for people having a business like me, for instance, is, but for everyone, I would say, is having around the right people. So choosing the right people to navigate these difficult times. And in my experience, I did thousands of interviews, for potential employees and so on. And I'm not really good, probably, in choosing people. I sit down, I read the CV, and then I have a look at the person, and I think it's good, it's bad, I don't know. And sometimes I thought they were genius and they were horrible, and other times I thought, this is not so good, and then I still work with them after 12 years. So it's always really difficult to to detect the right personalities. And if you have if around you are bad people, like the bad characters, bad personalities, dangerous personalities, is game over. What kind of tips and suggestions could you give us to get together the right group of people?
This is a great question, and I appreciate you asking this, because this is one of the questions that I am often asked by a human resource is, we hire for skill, but we fire for attitude. Okay,
right.
This happens all the time. And how do we get the right people on board? And part of the problem is that we're not asking the right questions. Right. So one of the things that, I guess the best thing that the new book has to offer, Dangerous Personalities, is it has checklists. It has very robust checklists. In fact, it has the same checklist that we used in the FBI, which is about 120 items that you can look at and say, what are the behaviors? So we look at actual behaviors of the individual, and they say, for instance, do they have a propensity to exaggerate? Are they known to lie? Do they take shortcuts? Do they arrive on time, or do they always have an excuse? What is their attitude towards others? Are they indifferent? Are they dramatic in a way that attention must always be on them? I remember one individual who always insisted on being late to a meeting, so we would have to stop the meeting and pay attention. Well, this begins to speak of either the emotionally unstable or the malignant narcissist who you need to pay attention to. And one of the things, we point out in the book is that there are 4 personality types that are injurious, toxic to any organization. Obviously the first one is the malignant narcissist, which tends to take credit for things that they haven't done, insists that they're right, everybody else is wrong, no one else matters. They don't treat you as equals, and so forth. And these individuals go from job to job because nobody wants to manage them. The second one is the very emotionally unstable, which, sometimes we refer to them as the drama queens or the drama kings. Everything is blown out of proportion. These are the people that tend to file a lot of lawsuits. They tend to harass management, and they're not very productive. Then we have the individuals who have these traits of paranoia, and so they're always questioning management. They're very rigid in their thinking. They're always accusing management of, well, so-and-so got promoted because they're friends, and there's always something external. There's a fear that there's people are after them. And then, of course, the worst that can happen to any organization is when you have these individuals that are so flawed of character that they are, they have the traits of the sociopath and the psychopath. And we see this with, for instance, the people that get you to invest money and then take your money and run with it, and stuff. Bernard Madoff and so forth. And they don't care. They don't care who they hurt. They're the ones that call your grandmother up and get her to reveal her bank account number, and then they go out and they celebrate. Those are the most dangerous for any organization.
So I'll go through the checklist. Some personalities immediately reminded me of someone that I met in my life. So it's really, really important. Joe, it was a fantastic chat. I really enjoyed it. And what I understood is that my wife could easily read my face. So if I will ever cheat, I will put a mask on myself to try to. But you have an unfair advantage with your children or wife. I mean, if they say something, you could immediately say, no, you stole the jam. Or how does it work? Or in the personal life, it doesn't really work like that for you?
Well, you're right. When my daughter was growing up, I just had to tell myself, stop being an FBI agent and be a father. Even though as soon as she walked through the door, you can tell that something is wrong. Don't be an FBI agent, be a father. Allow them to, get away with things. Allow them to, to say, I was here when they were somewhere else. Because you want communication. If you're the person that, I get invited to parties and nobody wants to talk to me because they're scared to death. Oh, there's that guy that can read you. I conduct soliloquies at parties because I'm the other guy that will talk to myself. You have to. And the funny thing is, the only thing I look for in a conversation is, are they comfortable or uncomfortable? Are we having a good time or not? I don't look for anything else. And that's really, if I can conclude with something is, don't use body language for detecting deception. Use body language so that you can communicate more effectively, so you can be more empathetically, so you can be more understanding of others and they can understand you.
I love it. And Dennis said, I will buy that book. What an amazing person, Joe. And I absolutely agree. You are fantastic. And it's such a pleasure to talk with you. You have so many interesting points and also the good way of seeing things. I really like it. Joe, thank you so much. And good luck for everything then.
My pleasure. And stay healthy, wash your hands, cover your face. And thank you for having me. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
I'll see you soon. Bye.